Welcome to the Foresight Intelligent Cooperation Group, where I am filling in for our fearless leader, Allison Dudeman, who is in the air on a late flight. Fortunately, today we have a speaker, Gernot Heiser, to be interviewed on the topic of computer security, one that is very close to our hearts here at Foresight Institute. And to do that discussion, we have our senior fellow, Mark Miller, whose day job is with Agoric, working on these same topics. So I think we should have a very high-level discussion. And I think with that, Mark, I will make you co-host in case you have any need for that. And if you're ready, Mark, I will turn it over to you. Are you comfortable with that?
Sure.
Great. You are in charge, Mark. Take it away.
Okay. Gernot, I'm sorry. Do you have something to present?
No, I didn't expect that was needed. I did read through that book chapter, so I'm sort of briefed, and
Okay.
I got a bunch of questions from Allison, I think. Yes.
Okay. So since SEL4 is one of the main stars of that chapter, let's.
Thanks for the advertising.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was first of all wondering if you had any reactions to the chapter and to its coverage of SEL4 that you'd like to talk about, and then I have some questions for you.
No, I don't think there was anything wrong or anything that sort of offended me in any way. I think it was all pretty accurate and obviously written to be fairly approachable.
Okay, good. So the main question that I would have for you is SEL4 seems to me to clearly be, I will just say it the way I've said it to other audiences, the most important software project in the world. I truly believe that. I think it's very clear. I don't think that there's a close second. I think our security going forward, our ability to survive various upcoming crises and all that would all go much, much smoother if SEL4 were massively adopted and if much of the software infrastructure that the world is resting on, if we were in the process of porting it on from the current insecurable infrastructure onto SEL4. So the question I have is, given what to me seems like the obvious, crucial, crisis level importance of advancing SEL4, how is it that the world thinks it's spending many, many billions of dollars on computer security research and on trying to secure infrastructure against cyber war and other attacks, and SEL4 is essentially an unfunded project, is being funded at a tiny trickle by a university? How is it that that the adoption path to SEL4 is also so meager, that there's so few projects actually trying to get, so few projects for which computer security would actually be crucial, like self-driving cars, that where SEL4 has already demonstrated strength through the DARPA challenge at creating unsubvertible automated physical systems, unmanned aerial vehicle. How is it that there's been so little effort to adopt SEL4 in other projects? And especially, how is it that it's been ignored by the many billions of dollars of funding of cybersecurity?
Okay, I do share some of your frustration, Mark. I think it's been definitely a more painful and slower process than I hoped for. but it's not. I don't think it's quite as bad as you presented it here. In terms of sort of support, we're not swimming in billions, but we're getting a fair bit of support now from various quarters. One is that that hasn't been, well, DARPA has been supporting the SEL4 ecosystem for quite a while. And there's new programs coming up that seem to be, from what I can tell, very much in the same sort of vein of continuing that support. Of course, I can't read too much into it until I've seen the actual announcements, but that they haven't come out yet. But sort of looking at who's in charge there and what they're talking about and thinking, well, I think there's definitely more to come from that direction. There's the UK National Cybersecurity Centre that has, that's not much announced yet. It's about to, that has sent significant amount of money our way. And on the other hand, the SEO4 Foundation has attracted a number of industry players. In particular, the biggest group there is actually electric car makers looking at autonomous driving. So things are moving a bit more than it might seem to the untrained eye. Although I definitely would love to see more, and in particular, I would love to see more collaboration across the industry in moving these things across, rather than every company trying to roll their own and most likely with a pretty high risk of stuffing it up, I would say. So that's one aspect of the answer. The other one is, of course, that the general autonomous driving space has, I wouldn't say bigger problems, but has a lot of other problems too, including the whole trustworthiness of the AI itself, and the approach taken there. And I must say, what I hear from Elon Musk, basically applying the same patch and pray approach that Microsoft is applying to Office. He seems to apply that to autonomous cars that can kill people and will kill people. That's definitely outright scary and shows a complete irresponsibility and dismissal of system of the threat to human life that's at work there. So there's definitely still a huge need for a rethink, but I think besides that, there's definitely much more happening than people are aware of. There's also a lot of frustration from my side in seeing where it's not happening. Like we've been in discussions directly or indirectly with major car manufacturers who then decided to adopt some outdated technology instead for whatever reasons. So we're not over the hill there yet, but at least there's a significant number of players that are really adopting this technology.
What did you think of the rest of the chapter, by the way, or the rest of the book, if you've taken a look at that, with regard to setting a context around, the role of secure computing and sort of a more the larger context of how secure computing fits into moving into a safer future?
I haven't had to look at the rest of the book, but I did read the rest of the chapter, and I think some of these things I cannot comment on because it's not my expertise, in particular the relation to cyber currencies, etc. You know way more about that than I do, and how this relates to the blockchain ecosystem. I'm so definitely out of my depth there. But the idea of really using this as a building block for secure systems, and the idea, the sort of intriguing idea of takeover by stealth, if you seem to be proposing there is certainly very intriguing. Yeah. I wasn't sure whether I consider that overly optimistic or overly pessimistic or unrealistic, but it's certainly a very interesting aspect. And I must say, it's a week ago since I read it, so with a million context switches in between, so some of that has already sort of left the cache.
Say, Mark, Kate is pointing out in the chat that there will be viewers who are not familiar with SEL4. So can you, either you or Gernot, give a sort of a high-level definition and explain how the approach differs from operating systems we might already be familiar with?
Okay. Yeah. And Kate, can we, do we know how to unmute Kate?
Yes.
Good.
I think you know your audience better, Mark, and you've done a good job in describing what SEL4 is. Why don't you have go?
Okay. So the thing that's unique about SEL4 itself is that it's not just a good, secure operating system, but it was one that was constructed from the beginning so that it could be proven correct and secure with a automated proof check, with a mechanized proof, as we call it. And the effort to, and it was really the first substantial system in the history of computer science. I would say it was the first real substantial industrial quality system that had an end-to-end proof that the implementation was secure. Most previous such efforts didn't actually, either looked at the implementation code of trivial academic exercises or created a model of the system, manually abstracting from the code, and then would carry out formal proofs that the model of the system was correct, leaving the gap between the actual system and the model of the system as a fallible manual step. So SEL4 has was constructed to do that, succeeded at doing that. I remember a conference that I was at a few years later where every other system that was formally proven correct would all compare themselves to SEL4. It was kind of the gold standard of here's the success that we need to do better than, or we need to compare ourselves to. But as we say in the chapter, even a mathematical proof doesn't give you certainty, does not give you zero risk, because there's all sorts of ways that something can be insecure even after a mathematical proof has allegedly proven it's secure. So even after a mathematical proof, and Toby Murray, by the way, of the SEL4 project, has written a very nice paper on explaining some of the remaining sources of risks after something has been mathematically proven secure. So the other wonderful thing about SEL4 is that DARPA subjected it to a really intense red team attack that's explained in the paper that we give a citation to in the book. And it was by a red team attack team at DARPA that no other previous system had survived a red team attack by these attackers. And the attackers in this case reported that they made no progress even towards finding a weakness. So the kind of exercise that a red team attack is, and the kind of exercise that a mathematical proof is, are very different forms of evidence. The strengths and weaknesses of one are very complementary to the strengths and weaknesses of another. So having two such very different forms of evidence all point to the possibility that SEL4 is actually perfectly secure is actually some fairly strong evidence that it is perfectly secure. Another thing we explain in the book is that we can never have zero risk because we can never be sure that we've built a perfect system, but that doesn't mean that we can't build perfect systems. We can just never know that we have done so. So SEL4 might be perfect. There's some good evidence, but we don't know. So our risk that it's imperfect is not zero. So that's sort of the main thing that's specific to SEL4. More generally, SEL4 is an object capability operating system. The object capability access control paradigm is one that I've been doing work in for many decades, and so have several of the people on this call. There's many things to say about why it's a much better security paradigm for building secure systems on. So, if SEL4 had been proven perfectly secure at implementing a bad security paradigm such that it was impossible for application programmers to use it to build practical secure systems, it wouldn't be doing us much good. Fortunately, SEL4 is implementing what, as far as we know, is the best security paradigm, the best access control paradigm to implement to enable other programmers to build secure systems on top of it. And of all of the things we can say about object capabilities, the most important is the principle of least authority, which is that it naturally supports building systems in which each component of the system is given ideally no more authority than it needs to carry out its proper duties. And I say ideally because stated as least, it's of course an unrealizable ideal. We're trying to get as close as we can to least. But the contrast is all of the other access control paradigms give each component vastly, vastly more authority than they need to carry out their proper duties. And therefore, if they have a flaw enabling them to be subverted, or if they're actually written maliciously, but if they have but in either case, even if the underlying foundations are secure, if the things built on top of it have subvertible flaws, then attackers can make use of those flaws to at least subvert what that component itself is doing. The object capability approach enables compositional security, where not only is each component given the least authority that it needs, but it enables the authors of that component to build that component so that the subcomponents of that component are in turn given the least authority with that they need to be subcomponents of that component. It depends on the author of that component doing so, but enables them to do so. And that creates this fractal resilience that we talk about in the paper, where at every level of composition, we further reduce the aggregate risk. We further remove the attack surface. And by doing this at multiple scales simultaneously, we get a multiplicative increase in robustness. And I'll leave the geometric explanation to the diagrams in the chapter. And since several other people on this call are well-versed in and have been working in the object capability paradigm, if anybody would like to jump in and point out some important things that I've missed, please do so.
There is a question from Kate in the chat. She's in a noisy environment, so she wanted to communicate via chat. She has a specific question, excuse me, which is, what do users have to unlearn the most in order to use SEL4? Any examples or stories of people needing to adapt to the new architecture?
So that's an interesting question. I guess one aspect is you really only get the benefits of SEO4 if you have a relatively fine-grained composition of your system, right? It needs to be broken into relatively small components and composed of those. And so that's in contrast to how most systems are built, whether it's operating systems like Linux or Windows, where everything is in one big mess. And if you find any exploit, you control the system. If you structure your system like that, then the guarantees SEO4 gives you are not worth anything. The whole system architecture needs to be adapted so it can make use of this encapsulation and least privilege. That's nothing new about SEO4. This is sort of inherent in this. What's really one of the fundamentals underneath is this idea of having a minimal trusted computing base and using least privilege in order to minimize the damage you can do. What SEO, and that's a pretty well as principle that goes to the Orange Book 80s. The main difference with SEO4 is that it guarantees your isolation boundaries, and therefore it allows you to really enforce interfaces, and the object capability model allows you to use these interfaces in a least privileged fashion. It's actually, I can't sort of have a slide at some of my colleagues there. SEO4 was the first operating system kernel that was formally verified. In the meantime, there's about a couple others. Most of them are academic toys, but interestingly, none of them bothered with an object capability system, which, as we know, makes life so much easier if you don't have to worry about capabilities and prove that all authorization is probably done subject to presenting a capability.
I see Alan has his hand up. Alan, would you like to say your question?
Yeah, so to Kate's question, end users have to unlearn the fact that they can have security without it being annoying. Object capabilities allow you to build user interactions that are smooth, seamless, and still have security. Developers, on the other hand, have to adapt. And they have to understand that they have to explicitly grant all the permissions a given function will need, and that they cannot rely on global variables to pass things around and have permissions around. And that takes some unlearning. But from the end user point of view, they have to understand that even though the system isn't annoying, they still have security.
Yeah, one of the things that I've definitely found over my career trying to teach people object capabilities is that people who are good software engineers who understand abstraction and modularity and have no background in security it's easier to teach them object capability security than it is people who have a background in conventional computer security. So that's a major piece of unlearning, is that there's this whole conventional approach to computer security that based on the opposite access control paradigm, identity-based access controls or access control lists, which is the thing that pushes us to the opposite of principle of least authority, where the square root function inside my math library is able to delete all of my files within the rules of my operating system. That's because it operates as me. It's using my identity. It operates according to my identity. And teaching people to give up the identity orientation, or at least de-emphasize it to the degree to which it needs to be de-emphasized. There's still an identity orientation even in object capability systems, but it's very, very different, and it's incredibly less important than it is in the conventional paradigm. So there's this whole way of thinking in the conventional paradigm that you have to unlearn if you're coming from a background in that conventional paradigm.
And of course, that also is part of the explanation why the uptake is so slow in many ways, right? Because you need to, there's a lot of functionality to develop. And of course, the easiest way to provide all that functionality people expect is to take put a virtual machine in there, put a Linux system in there, and get it from there. But then you don't really get any benefits in terms of security as far as this functionality is concerned. So in order to make it really safe, you have to re-engineer all that legacy functionality on an SEL4 based system, and that's the biggest blocker. It's less of an issue in where SEL4 is really deployed mostly at the moment, embedded in cyber physical systems, because they have they require much less functionality. Also, they tend to be fairly static, and therefore don't really require any much resource management, etc., which is all complexities that you need to overcome when you want to build a system. Although I do see from the automotive space that there is a much more dynamism, if that's the word, required than our current user level frameworks allow. It's not a limitation of SEL4, it's the limitation of the developer frameworks we provide on top of SEL4, which are definitely extremely limited. And sort of overcoming that barrier is actually something we're working on at the moment actively with industry partners. And of course, from there, it's a far cry to sort of replacing a general purpose operating system with SEL4. And of course, that is the part where the object capability paradigm is particularly powerful, but it's also the part where still a lot of research is outstanding, not just development, but actual research on how do you build performance systems that have this enforceable, provable security, and enforcing the built on least privilege and all the other standard security principles.
I see Steve.
Chris Hibbert next, and then Steve Omohundra.
Very good.
Okay, I'm interested in whether how long it will be till we can get OCAP-based systems as our primary personal computing environments, the place where I send email and browse the web and all the other things one does. Is anybody working on building environments like that? It doesn't have to start out great. Linux started out with pretty unusable systems, and getting to usability was much later. Starting with environments for sophisticated users seems like a fine thing.
So there's actually an example of that out there, which is perfectly usable, and that's the Gernot system. That's a capability-based, componentized operating systems framework. The developer is a company called Gernot Systems, or Gernot or whatever. And their developers actually run Gernot on their PCs. So it's there. It also runs on SEL4, although that's I don't think that's actually actively supported and was never really complete. And the whole Gernot framework has issues in the sense of what we could actually possibly prove about the system. And it's written in C++, which basically, for the time being, rules out verification anyway.
Is anybody working on something like that for SEL4?
We do have a research project that's very early stage. We call it the Back to the Future project, because it attempts what people tried to do in the 70s and 80s, build provable, secure general purpose operating systems. But our first application for funding got knocked back. We got some funding through the UK NCSC support to keep it going, and we'd like to scale it up. That's the most targeted initiative in this way right now. And the plan there is to come up with a credible prototype about where we can do some high-level proofs and argue and proofs of some critical components and argue that the rest of the critical components are also tractable to prove. And yeah, you basically have a template on which people can then build.
Okay, Steve?
I think the SEL4 project is super exciting. Like Mark said, probably one of the most important computer science projects there is. I'm especially interested in how you formalize the various properties that you needed. In this group, we've talked a lot about trying to use formalization, say, on the blockchain for smart contracts, for hybrid smart contracts, which are partly on the blockchain, partly off, for how they connect to real-world physical systems. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about how challenging it will be to expand formalization beyond a sort of very tight container and more into the physical world.
Yep. Okay, I have to say I'm not a formal methods person. I'm an operating systems guy. I do work a lot with formal methods people, and I developed a reasonable feel on what's feasible and what sort of timeframes might be. But in the end, it's really a question: how can we scale the whole thing up? Right? We've got a system that's verified. That's 10,000 lines of code roughly. Any sort of halfway reasonable, non-trivial system will have a trust computing base that's probably an order of magnitude bigger. And of course, you can play a security verifiability trade-off by making the components smaller, not as a security performance trade-off, I meant to say, making the components smaller, then they become easier to verify, and but then you have more and you have to verify the composition, and of course the every context switch costs you performance, although I'm yet to see a case in a properly designed system where this is a real issue. But yeah, so the scalability is generally a really big thing, and push button verification techniques will be required, and some people have been using those, including on operating systems, quite successfully. So this is something we also started looking at just recently. And then the question, how do you formalize things, etc. There's actually a fair amount of formalization work on various aspects going on in the industry already, right? Amazon and Apple and number of other big companies, they actually employ a lot of formal methods people, and typically using more model checking and SMT solver-based approaches. So typically prove relatively narrow properties, but in a much more scalable fashion, as opposed to sort of the opposite extreme of what we've done in SEL4, which is prove full functional correctness, but then being at the mercy of relatively small human verifiers. And to me, that the biggest frustration of the project is how much effort it takes to change anything on the kernel, because first you have to get buy-in from the verifiers, and then they actually have to do it, which is a order of magnitude more work. So I think there's a fair bit of experience around already in verifying the desirable system properties, formalizing the desired properties, formalizing interfaces, etc. That's probably not the hardest bit in terms of scalability, but it's also something that already exposes a lot of the bugs. We've seen that in SEL4 itself, where the bugs we found in the kernel, which were fair number, 450 for 10,000 lines of code, is a pretty high bug density for operating systems code, but it's because we didn't really QA it much, let a few students loose on it. And they broke down pretty much equally into the top level functional spec, the sort of intermediate level executable spec, and the actual C code. So by just specifying things, you flush out a lot of bugs, and we've had similar experience later on, when we added new features to the kernel, changed the scheduling model to be suitable for mixed criticality systems, etc. I think in that case, there's probably an even higher percentage of the bugs flushed out at the specification level. So yeah, there's a reasonable amount of understanding how to do these things. The biggest limit tends to be the number of people who can actually do it. There's definitely a human resourcing challenge here. On the other hand, what you get, and this comes down again to just the benefit of just formally specifying things. It forces you to be explicit about all the assumptions you make. And we've just gone through another case of that where Mark might be aware of the time protection project, where we try to prove that a version of SEO4 on suitable hardware can provably eliminate micro-architectural timing channels. We had a paper on that a few years ago, won Best Paper Award, etc., and we were really thought we had it nailed. And then we go into verification and we find, oh, we overlooked a few things. And one of them is the reason I'm here in Zurich at the moment, to talk to my collaborators and discuss how we actually can solve that in a way that the hardware people will actually buy it and provide us the right hooks for it. So sorry for this somewhat rambling response, which I'm not actually sure whether it answered your question. Feel free to.
Okay. Alan next, then Ryan, and then I have a question.
Yeah, I think one of the things to reach Chris's goal is language support to ensure that your program isn't violating the OCAP rules. Yes, it's nice to have a UI that that lets you apply your policies with OCAPs, but I think the thing it's written in should also be OCAP. The Joe E project, Adrian Mettler's project, your Java program would compile if you violated the OCAP rules. The ECMAScript work is doing that for JavaScript. I just read a blog post. There's a Rust project to make Rust have an OCAP version of Rust. And I think without that, we're not going to get the desktop. It may look like an OCAP desktop to the user, but Gnode's written in C++. It isn't OCAPs under the covers.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. This goes back to this recursive reduction of the attack surface that I was mentioning before. I think that languages, secure OCAP languages, like the Agoric work on hardened JavaScript that Alan mentioned, and the earlier language work like Joe E. But hardened JavaScript being something that's ready for production use by a multi-million person programming ecosystem, that this has in many ways as much to contribute to overall vulnerability reduction as secure operating systems, because at this finer grain that operating systems can't touch, it also removes much of the attack surface. It also provides software authors the ability to divide things into yet finer components, all the way down to the granularity of individual programming language objects that are encapsulated and that interact with each other. I mean, it's already the case in normal object-oriented programming that you program with encapsulated objects and unforgeable pointers, object pointers or object references. And the rules of pure object programming are already essentially the rules of object capability programming. But by making the languages true object capability languages, you get to remove those other sources of vulnerability down to very, very fine grain. And if you do it both at the operating system granularity and at the programming language granularity, those benefits multiply. You get a multiplicative benefit. just to be very explicit, operating systems, by the nature of how they're implemented, are fundamentally limited to page granularity. You can't get protection of protection units that are smaller than an individual page of memory. And object capability programming languages can take you all the way down. And the other really beautiful thing is that if you've got both object capability programming language and an object capability operating system, you can bridge the two. So from the point of view of somebody thinking at the operating system level, the object capability systems written in the programming language seem from the outside to just be more object capability operating system domains, protection domains that you can interact with by doing, system calls, because you're doing it across a bridge that turns them into language calls, and vice versa. If you're to a person programming in the programming language, in an object capability programming language, they can see all of the operating system services presented through capability APIs as if they were written in the object capability programming language, presented through the programming, through object APIs. Agoric is, we have our own blockchain-based operating system that we've done called SwingSet that was built to directly reflect that. And we've got, going back to the work that we did in the late 90s and 2000s, we also bridged to a cryptographic distributed object protocol that again makes remote objects look like just more objects written in the programming language, even though they're running on mutually suspicious machines elsewhere. You're protected against the machines by the protocol in very much, from the programmer's point of view, in very much the same way you're protected from objects that you don't trust. Okay, Ryan.
Wow, that was a lot to digest. I have a question about Fuchsia, which is, or is or was, an OCAP from the bottom operating system. Does this paradigm support translation to SEL4 more easily? How do I think about shaping the trust boundary incrementally? I guess those might be two different questions.
Yeah, I am not familiar with Fuchsia. It's been on my list of things to become familiar with. If anybody here is familiar with Fuchsia, if they would care to comment. Gernot, have you taken a look at it at all?
We had a project, actually a student project a few years back, mapping it onto SEL4, which wasn't all that difficult, and made me really question why the hell did Google do this from scratch rather than taking SEL4.
Having been at Google, having been at Google, I can attest to the extremely strong "not invented here" syndrome that pervades the culture over there. The reason they did it from scratch, I would say, is primarily because they had a bunch of engineers itching to do an operating system.
I have to say, knowing one of the people who worked on Fuchsia, they're definitely that kind of person.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Gernot, please continue.
Yeah, I can't really say much more about that. It wasn't even called Fuchsia at the time. There was another name for it at that stage. So it was fairly early. But yeah, I don't really. It maps on the SEL4 as far as I can tell, and with incredible overhead. So there's people who compared performance, not us, and they found it's a factor of 10 in IPC slower than SEL4, which is pretty much the sort of the standard ratio in any non-L4 microkernel. It tends to be about that speed. So yeah, it on the one side, it's great that there's building an operating system that's built on the right principles, and on the other hand, it seems a bit of a crazy project.
the second part of my question was, what are the paradigms that help me understand how to kind of carve out the trust boundary from, let's say I say, oh, I'm going to implement something that works right now in Linux. I'll just turn all the permissions off and create a very loose boundary that's not secure. And then over time, I will take different pieces and put them in their own kind of well-described layers in SCL4 and get them communicating with each other. It's a very technical question, and I apologize to the group, but where do I learn about these paradigms and how to incrementally manage that kind of management pain?
I don't think I can give you a principled answer there. It's actually the approach that's been taken in the DARPA HACMS program and got dubbed incremental cyber retrofit by the DARPA program manager. So the Boeing people took the existing system, which was Linux-based, just put it in a virtual machine on top of SCL4, and then started pulling components out, either rewriting them or putting them as native components on SCL4 until they had a really bulletproof system. It's just one aspect of sort of good systems design, right? What makes a good component, and how do you have to choose the components that you minimize the number of components or the total amount of code you have to depend on.
Thank you.
Oh, and yeah, I think I queued myself up next with a question. And frankly, I forgot what my question was. So if anybody else has something to raise, please do.
Meanwhile, Mark, maybe you could go back to Allison's list.
Okay, actually, let me, I'm going to ask Alan a question. Alan, you pointed out in one of the drafts of this chapter, something that we completely agree with, but have not yet done anything about, which is in this chapter and in the entire book, one of the things that we ignore that's kind of essential is user interface security. That it's kind of the last 100 yards of system security, and it's something that is often an afterthought, as witnessed by the fact that we omitted it from the book so far. And without it, much of the rest of computer security is pointless. So I was wondering if you could explain how all of this relates to user interface security, and in particular, how the bridge from the user to the system has some similarity with our approach to user interface security, has some similarity to these bridges between language and OS, or between language and protocol, et cetera.
Well, yeah. So, of course, if the human doesn't understand the implications of their actions, you're going to have trouble. But in the user experiences that we developed, the key principle, and I think Ka-Ping Yee was the first one to point out, that you have to make the secure way the easy way, because people will always choose the easy way. And so, the focus has to be that when the user wants to do something, the easiest way to do it will not violate the kind of security properties that you want to enforce underneath it. That's one thing. The other thing is that you don't want to be asking questions. Are you sure? In fact, Stigler and I have a tech report. Are you sure? Yes. Oops. That's the title. And so you have to think about the state of the user's brain at each stage of the interaction. In particular, the reason a confirmation dialog box fails, we believe, is that the user's brain is already on the next task by the time the dialog box pops up. So that if you're going to confirm what you want to do is you want pre-confirmation. It's like opening the cover on the launch missile or abort missile on the you know, at NORAD, where they always show they have to lift the cover before they could push the big red button, right? You're at that point, the user is still focusing on the task at hand, not the next one. And so Stigler came up with this way of implementing pre-confirmation. So before you the delete button, you have to enable the delete button before you can delete, and then we don't have to ask after. But the whole point is that we need psychology experts to understand the state of the user's brain if we're going to have secure systems end to end, including the human being.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the fact that security is really a multi-layer problem, right? You can't solve it at the operating system alone. You can't solve it without the operating system either. The same applies to the protocol level and certainly the human interface, for sure.
But what we found about OCAPs, a big part of what people do is sharing. Sharing with other programs they're running, sharing with other coworkers or friends. And what we found was that OCAPs enable us to make seamless interaction designs that are simply impossible with an ACL system, with an identity-based system. And so that gives us hope that with OCAPs underneath, we can develop user interactions that will make it easier for people to avoid making mistakes.
Yeah, and let me say that you know, getting a little more philosophical is that there's a certain natural flow that for making requests for the sake of functionality that has developed over time in computer science, both at the language level and at the operating system level. And the OCAPs bring security in a way that's aligned with the way that we organize interactions and organize knowledge for the sake of functionality. There's a certain sparseness of required knowledge that we build our systems around. So in a user interface, when you want to ask a program to operate on a file, you tell it that you would like it to operate on a file. An open file dialog box pops up, for example. You select the file from there, and then it operates on that file. That's the user interaction. The implementation, the conventional implementation of that user interaction right now is that it's the program itself that renders the open file dialog box. So the program itself has access to all of your files, and you're only depending on its proper behavior to only operate on the file that you select. But from the user's point of view, you're just, they see the same open file dialog box they normally see, and they're just asking the program to operate on that one file. In an OCAP system, and in particular in the systems that Mark Stiegler and Alan Karp and Kapigny and Tyler Close have done such seminal work on, these acts of designation, these acts of saying what you want to operate on, are also the acts that provide the authority to operate on it. So so it wouldn't be the program that can see all of your files. It would be the act of selecting it in a open file dialog box that would give that program access to just that one file. Likewise, at the programming language level or at the API design level, you design APIs so that the parameters to a function call or a method call only contain arguments that are relevant to the request you're making. And if those arguments that are parameterizing the request, that are explaining to the recipient what object the requester wants the recipient to operate on, if by simply making those requests be the ones that carry the authority to do the operation on the designated object, then the least authority, the sparseness of authority, the sparseness of permissions that you've created is aligned with the sparseness of knowledge that we naturally create in order to build usable systems for functionality. Our systems are filled with a tremendous number of things, most of which are irrelevant to any one request. We construct systems to create a sparsity of knowledge so that we can have a tractable problem of what request to make and what to provide as parameters to that request. And the sparseness of knowledge we create so that it's tractable to formulate those requests. OCAPs align the sparseness of permission along those lines. And that's why we say sometimes that whereas other security paradigms are security paradigms that are bolted onto the side of computation that occurs by other means, OCAPs is a model of secure computation. It's not a model of security to be bolted onto computation by other means.
Now, one of the objections I always get to OCAPs is the fine-grained nature. How could people possibly manage all those millions of permissions? It's just crazy. And this Stigler's, I think Stigler was the one who identified the concept of using acts of designation as acts of authorization. I point out, if you want to operate on a file, you've got to say what file it is. You've got millions of files, but you got to say which file it is. And that act of designation can be the act of authorization. By the way, Polaris showed that you can get a lot of the benefits even without OCAPs, just by using the same fine-grained principles that if you have an OCAP underlying system would be far easier to implement. For those who don't know, in early 2000s, we built a virus-safe and computing environment for Microsoft Windows XP, which, if you remember, was horribly insecure. Our users, we had about 150 users. Some of them got hit by real viruses. I remember Markham got one that would have forced him to rebuild his machine, I think. And Polaris protected him just by applying this principle of least authority at the level of the application. We couldn't get it turned into a product for perfectly good reasons. Couldn't charge enough to cover the support costs, but it was sad.
Oh, something I do want to bring up that's sort of the weakness of object capabilities by themselves as a paradigm, which is in the chapter, and drawing on the previous work that Alan and I and others have done, or Horton, we talk about proactive safety and reactive damage control. Object capabilities, because of their support for least authority, are much, much better than anything else at proactive safety. By giving out the least authority needed, the opportunities for damage, for bugs leading to damage, are much better limited. But of course, sometimes we're still going to give out more authority than we should have. Sometimes the authority we give out will be abused, and we will regret having given it out. And because of the anonymity of object capabilities as practiced directly as a paradigm, once authorities already given out are abused, there's little recourse to recovering from that. And the identity-based access control system is not normally explained as a paradigm to support reactive damage control, but it does actually contain one element that gives it an advantage for reactive damage control, which is being able to attribute misbehavior so that you can choose to stop interacting with the entity to whom you've attributed the misbehavior. And that raises all sorts of questions about false flag operations of misleading you to misattribute the misbehavior to the wrong party and then cut off the wrong party, which is itself a form of attack. And all of those games are interesting, but it doesn't contradict the need to be able to recover somehow from inappropriately having handed out too much authority. So, Alan and I are already familiar with kind of the Horton approach, and the Alan and Stiegler built a system called Scoofs that for file access that is kind of a special case of Horton. So before I get to any of that, I also just wanted to ask Gernot, who doesn't have anything like Horton in there, Gernot, what's your experience with and attitude towards the issue of retroactively recovering from having given out too much authority?
I don't really have any experience with that because we really haven't built real dynamic on SEO4. So sadly, this is the project at the moment. The capabilities in SEO4 basically used to enforce static architecture where you no access rights change during the execution of the system. So we've built the basis, but we haven't really got much experience in actually using it to the full extent.
Yeah, so that's clearly where revocation comes in, and that's your recourse. You may not even need to know who is abusing a particular provision. You just need to know that it was abused. Horton allowed in an enterprise setting something like Horton, where you can provide audit trails of who delegated to whom and who did what with what resource can help. And that's what we did in the Zebra copy work with certificate-based. You could include audit trail information with the certificate that was actually used as a capability. And I wanted to bring up another point here. All the discussion so far has concerned a single machine. But of course, the world is distributed, and we're sharing across machines. We're sharing across jurisdictions, as we call them. And those are also very important, and OCAPS has a lot to say there. I think I've been attending the Internet Identity Workshop since number 7. I think we just had number 35. They're every 2 years. They're twice a year. When I started, I couldn't use the word capability. That was known to be a false technology. And now everybody everything is by default capabilities. So that's
we went through the same with microkernels.
Yeah. Yes. I agree. I remember reading the papers on why microkernels didn't work. So, but that's all about distributed systems. And I think OAuth, even though they didn't know they were inventing a capability system, is close enough that it helped change the thinking. Along with Markham's presentation at Rebooting Web of Trust, it was so funny. That was a couple of months before an IIW, and everybody at IIW was just astounded about this brand new technology called capabilities and this genius Mark Miller, and they all wanted to touch his ring, and it was quite a remarkable shift. But I was laughing, but when you remember you showed up and people were just coming up to touch your shoulder as a great honor. So, but they had no idea that this thing existed, and but I think now in the world of distributed systems, capabilities in the form primarily of digital certificates, even though OAuth bearer tokens are used in real systems as capabilities, is beginning to take over the access control model for distributed systems. And I think that's quite important.
Yeah. The thing that's in this context, the thing that's especially important about Horton as a pattern for identity-based access control, for reactive damage control, for this keeping track of delegation chains so that you can do targeted selective revocation according to attributed misbehavior, is that it's a pattern built on a pure capability foundation. It doesn't require at the foundational level anything other than pure capabilities in order to provide at a higher layer through this pattern the identity tracking and targeted revocation. So it could, for example, be built on top of SEL4 without introducing any new foundational elements.
Now, in the real world, in the world with certificates and distributed systems, it's easier to provide the identity information. But there's one big difference there, that you can never know who, because people can share credentials. So you can only know who to hold responsible. And that's an important distinction that's often forgotten. The identity-based people, the Apple people, always say, but how do you know who did it? And in the real world, people share credentials, and so you still don't know who did it. But they don't understand that until you point it out.
I've got 15 more minutes.
So, Gernot, what would you like to talk about?
I just had to skim through my notes on the paper. One comment I had, which is when you taught over adoption barriers, etc. And I think the biggest practical barrier here is just that the fact that security by and large is a classical market failure. The market rewards people building insecure systems, building things quick and insecurely. And we're using the Zoom platform here. And of course, the way they became really dominant is by shipping something very quickly that was very functional and very insecure. Fortunately, Zoom bombs don't kill people, but Elon Musk is now doing the same with self-driving cars. And I hope they put them in jail before he kills too many. But this is the sort of attitude we are in general in security.
So that's why in the chapter we also point at the blockchain ecosystem as a source for hope, and being the founder of a startup company, Agoric, in the blockchain ecosystem, I can say very concretely that the incentives here really are very, very different in a good way. That if you respond to time to market pressures and ship insecurable crap quickly in order to get out onto the market, this ecosystem punishes you very quickly. Is that suddenly, exploitable flaws will cause hundreds of millions of dollars to disappear overnight with no recourse, that's unrecoverable. And so the effort that people in this ecosystem put into verification, for example, I mean, these are, startup companies building new systems and deploying it and putting some significant effort into third-party security audits, into formula verification, into much more rigorous code reviews and open reviews through the open source, inviting people to criticize and find flaws, and having test nets, adversarial test nets, inviting people to try to attack significant bug bounties with actually a lot of money being posted as bug bounties. And all of this in the, against the reality of the fact that once the system goes commercial, the amount of money to be stolen is the huge bug bounty that will attract attackers very quickly. So this, for the first time, provides a hostile enough ecosystem even for early efforts, that the early efforts feel a genuine market pressure to be secure before their first real deployment. And this is just completely different than my previous 40 years in the computer industry, where I've been begging companies to pay, including Google, to pay more attention to security, and instead they just keep shipping insecurable systems and manage the insecurities rather than fix them. It's genuinely different here. And the result is that we now have, because of those market pressures, this ecosystem has a chance to build a full stack from the foundations all the way up to the user, including the user interface issues. And all of this is very early. So there's still a lot of actual work to be done here to achieve this goal. But we're feeling the genuine market pressures to build at all of the levels of the stack to get them right enough so that people can use them in a safe enough manner where real assets are at stake. And by evolving a full stack of abstractions from the foundations all the way up to the user, a lot of these ideas, a lot of the software concretely, will be also reusable outside of blockchain per se, and would be able to substitute for other software. This is the what do you call it, Gernot? The not sly, but the way we're trying to kind of slip in the
I mean,
I forget the term you use.
stealth?
But I'm sorry?
You mean stealth?
Stealth, that's the term that Gernot used, yeah. And we call it genetic takeover elsewhere in the book, is that if there's one place where a better ecosystem can evolve, where most of that ecosystem is reusable outside of blockchain anyway, then when attacks on mainstream software get bad enough, if they grow gradually enough that the mainstream software is destroyed incrementally enough that we're still in a civilization that's working during this dynamic, then we've perhaps grown an alternative that people can switch to instead. Unfortunately, the kind of operating system that you build for blockchain has many similarities to operating systems like SEL4, the swing set operating system that Agoric is building does, but in many ways they're fundamentally different because of the need for blockchains to be deterministically replicatable. But a lot of the levels above the operating system that we are building in the Agoric stack would be directly portable onto systems like SEL4 or onto bare metal that could run in a more conventional way outside of blockchain.
I think I want to touch on one point that Alison raised in her questions, and that's what's the role of AI. There's lots of AI for cybersecurity happening right now, and I must say I'm a bit ambivalent about this because I see AI in the security space basically as a combustion accelerator. It accelerates the arms race because it automates finding of bugs both for the attacker and the defender, and it doesn't really fundamentally change the problem that the attacker has the advantage. The attacker only has to find one hole and the defender has to cover them all. And AI just makes that whole loop faster, I think is the main issue. You can argue that it will probably make things harder to attack, but then yeah, you can automate the attacks much better. So I'm not sure whether it's a net gain or a loss, but of course, given that the attackers are in it, the defenders have to be in it as well, until they build systems that are secure from the bottom up.
The way the picture we try to paint in this chapter is that right now the main problem behind the market failure that we've talked about is that the world right now is too forgiving, that the attacks are not intense enough, and that automated attacks can make the attacks sufficiently intense that the current degree to which the world is forgiving of companies deploying insecurable crap might get fixed. That the strong attack incentive that we're seeing in blockchain that causes that ecosystem to be hostile enough that only secure software survives the long-term survivors in that ecosystem, that automated attacks, as we saw in the DARPA Grand Challenge, can make the regular world of software hostile enough as to make deploying insecurable crap stop.
So you're basically saying that the effect is indirect in that it makes the attacks too easy, so people have to start doing something about it. Yeah. Let's hope that's actually true. Basically, you say it's going to fix the market failure, so we can always hope.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another thing that we point to along the same lines, which is ransomware. We say that ransomware right now is about the best case we can hope for. And the reason is that it creates an incentive for attackers to attack in a visible manner and to attack systems individually rather than mounting a simultaneous attack across the industry at once. So given that the danger of cyber war is that potential warring parties stockpile attacks or use them only for spying, which has no visible damage, and then in an actual cyber war might have an incentive to suddenly deploy them as a simultaneous attack against an adversary, so the adversary doesn't have a working system to recover from. The incentives on ransomware are quite the opposite. The ransomware attacker wants their victims to keep functioning well enough to pay off the ransomware and then recover operation if they don't want to kill the victim. But this only helps if the victim, once they've been attacked and pay off the ransomware and try to recover, react to this by turning to more secure software instead, rather than just running the same old insecurable crap again. And that's where this issue of the adoption barrier is so important, which is even someone recovering from ransomware, knowing that they have a problem, viscerally feeling that they have a problem like they've never been able to convince themselves of before, still have no good software that they can adopt instead, because the rest, us building secure platforms haven't gotten far enough as to provide them commercially viable alternatives that they can adopt, even when they're feeling that degree of pain. So this ransomware dynamic only helps once these secure systems have gotten far enough that they provide an actually adoptable alternative that people can adopt when they're feeling this pain.
I think Gernot may need to drop off at this point. Gernot, would you like to just say a couple words to wrap up? We are so thrilled that you joined us. Any last comments on your way out the door?
No, not really. I was fun talking to you guys, and hope I can help help improving the future. It's the best we can hope for.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And certainly, thanks a lot for all this strong moral support they are giving to SCL4, particularly in my year.
All right. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Mark, do you have anything you want to continue talking about, or are we at a good wrapping point?
So another thing that we talk about in the chapter that where I think our intuitions might be somewhat in conflict with Alan's intuitions is on the, so I'll turn this into a question for Alan, is Alan has also been a processor designer, CPU designer, and very much involved in processor design. And I think he was involved in the HP Itanium version of the x86 architecture.
Itanium was not a version of x86, but yes. Itanium was a very different architecture. Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we talk about in this chapter is the really terrible problem of hardware supply chain attacks. Is even if you've got a open hardware design that's been verified to be secure, that it's very hard to know that the hardware device that you've bought that seems to, that passes all of the tests that you can come up with to test it against the design that it supposedly implements, or even looking at it under an electron microscope. There are too many ways to build hardware. For example, linked to this paper about, cited paper about attacks at the analog level, where you've purposely deviated slightly from pure digital logic design rules in order to let charge accumulate in a targeted manner that the attacker knows how to induce to cause a bit flip from a software-induced pattern that causes that charge to accumulate. That this is one of many ways in which hardware manufacturers have lots and lots of degrees of freedom to build undetectable trap doors that can be triggered by the attacker. And at the same time, even if the hardware manufacturers have a strong disincentive to do that because they want to ship hardware that people want to buy and use, they are operating within jurisdictions like the United States that's known to strong-arm manufacturers into including trap doors in systems via national security letters that also, under severe legal penalties, force them, criminal penalties, not civil penalties, force them to not disclose that they've included those trap doors. So this seems to be together just an incredibly hard set of problems. And I'm wondering what Alan's response to that is.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the article that Ryan posted because I read one recently pointing out that actually the variations in manufacturing, the unavoidable variations that happen in manufacturing, make that attack actually impractical. I don't remember exactly where I read it. Maybe one of the IEEE magazines. That those unavoidable variants, in theory, that's viable, but it's not a practical scheme. The other thing is that the actual distribution of the work in producing a chip for a processor is distributed among many companies, each doing its own individual steps. And unless they're all in cahoots together, it's very hard to preserve that kind of undetectable backdoor.
Let me just interrupt you there. My intuition would be exactly the opposite, that it's an or rather than an and, that you have more parties, any one of which could subvert the system, because the trapdoor can occur in many parts of the system.
And in fact, because of the tight limits on how things operate, that a variation, that one step, imagine putting down multiple layers of a chip, right? And each layer being done by a different company. This is not, it's not, you know, the layer of the chips now, I don't know how many layers there are, tens, hundreds, I don't remember, lots of layers. And some of them are done in one place and some are done by another company in another place. I didn't know that till recently. But those interfaces are very delicate. And any variation is more likely to lead to chip failure than a vulnerability. So again, I'm not saying these attacks are impossible. They're theoretically possible. The articles I've read more recently say the threat may be real, but it's going to be very difficult to mount. And there are certain things in the supply chain that make them harder. So, and by the way, digital changes to the digital properties are actually easier to put in than the analog, again, because of the manufacturing variances. So I think that supply chains attacks against NPM are much more serious problem than against our chips.
I agree.
You know, in fact, we have row hammer and all that. Has that been used in an attack in the wild, or is it just a theoretical attack? I know it's very hard to mount. I know people have demonstrated it. I don't recall reading of any CVEs about it, attacks in the wild. And again, these supply chain attacks are extremely difficult. And if there are easier paths, I expect that those will be taken first. Oh, and by the way, there is research. I know one professor at Stanford is actually doing work on detecting both analog and digital supply chain attacks against chips. I spoke to him, well, now it was maybe 10 years ago, where I was still working for HP. And he had some interesting prospects for how to detect such attacks.
If you could, you know, offline, but if you could find a link to that, and I'd certainly be very interested.
Okay, yeah, like I said, I'm watching a baseball game and I'm reading IEEE Spectrum, and then something from what I'm reading sticks in my head, but where I got it from doesn't.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts about defenses against that kind of thing. One is sort of like you say in the chapter, having a kind of hierarchical system with multiple redundancies. So I could imagine, you know, having 3 separate implementations of every functionality on different supply chains, and then they all get checked together. That would make sort of detecting it more possible. The other is I think there's often the possibility for complex computation of developing a checker, which is much cheaper than the computation itself. And so using formal methods, it might be possible to wrap all of these things with checkers that statistically at least catch any mistakes with high probability.
So Steve, the problem there is the competitive pressures. It turns out that Intel's profit on the chips, at least, is determined almost entirely by how much silicon. So they were making things to save, you know, 0.5% of the silicon, and that translated into, I don't know, $10 million over the lifetime of the chip. And then the other one is performance. All these checks will affect performance simply because of the extra data paths involved. And even if the critical path isn't touched, if you're just tapping to read what's on the critical path, that slows things down by 3 picoseconds. And again, the competitive pressures will make that very hard. We had one case where HP had a bus problem, and we wanted to put a so the problem was, if you have if you have disks for your persistent storage and a CPU gets fried, you can pull the disk out and plug it into another computer. But if you're using NVRAM, as your persistent store in the CPU fries, you're stuck. Now, HP had a management bus in the back, and what we wanted to do was put on a tap to get so that you could read out that NVRAM. And it turned out that it was going to cost, 2 nanoseconds or some very small thing out of 50 nanoseconds. It was going to cost them 2 nanoseconds in normal operation, and we couldn't make it happen. So you have to understand, and this is again maybe the market failure, that we're not willing to pay these small amounts in competitive advantage for a large gain in security.
Yeah, and I think it's also one where we'd have to think in terms of segmenting the market. That the entire time I've been in the industry before blockchain, everything amplified, everything corroborated the point that Alan just made. That I propose something to a company, and if it has any significant performance costs at all, for the sake of any degree of increased security, no matter how high, that a performance cost, 3% was kind of what I eventually absorbed as sort of the absolute threshold. If it cost more than 3% performance, it didn't matter how much more security it provided; it was simply a no-go. And then Ethereum came out, which is really just about creating a credible computer platform, just answering this supply chain problem. It does it at a factor, at a cost of at least 1 million X overhead compared to a normal hardware CPU. But as the world has demonstrated, there's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of commerce that we didn't know about, that was waiting for a credible CPU and was able to make use of it at a performance cost of 1 million X. So one of the things that it's very easy to underestimate is what is the potential market that is for which there is no technology available that currently would serve that market. So we're not seeing the market arise. And I think a lot of these calculations about security versus performance are very much in that category, that you're seeing the incremental payoffs from decrease in performance and incremental security, and you're not seeing what's sort of on the other side of a major transition like Ethereum was.
Well, it's not just on the manufacturing side, it's on the purchasing side too. You'd think that banks and the big financial houses would be willing to pay 10% more to get a chip that was more secure, and they are not. It's that simple. And Ryan has an attack. He mentions the attack about subverting the random number generator, and that's true. I actually have a patent on a random number generator that will detect if it's been subverted, but that's a different matter. It was interesting. The last time I attended RSA physically on the trade show floor, there were at least half a dozen companies selling either hardware to generate random numbers or random numbers themselves. And it surprised me because I would have thought that the random numbers we're generating on our processors are good enough and we can get them fast enough, but apparently there's a market for that. Right?
Sure. I wanted to add that regarding the market, several vendors have come together for an open source high security hardware project for storing keys that you would use in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So I think for some of us that market demand is changing, and I hope that we can find the high security solution.
So for keys, there are key management systems out there that are rock solid, very, very secure. I know HP bought a company, Atala, that marketed them. Every device you use has a secure enclave. To the best of my knowledge, on the laptop, it's a TPM. I don't know what they call it on your phone. To the best of my knowledge, those have never been successfully attacked. There have been user interface attacks. There have been API attacks. For example, getting it to sign something the user did not intend to sign. But I don't know of any direct theft of the keys stored in these devices. So that may be a better answer for that subset of the problem rather than trying to harden the general purpose processor itself. And by the way, they have their own random number generator because these when they sign, they need a nonce to prevent replay.
Yeah, the problem with secure enclaves is that you're still trusting the hardware manufacturer.
Exactly. Yes.
And in this case, you're trusting them even more because generally the way these work is that there's some root keys that the manufacturer has that would enable abuse if those root keys were used for nefarious purposes. And of course, being companies within jurisdictions of governments that would strong arm them to engage in those nefarious purposes, that's a severe threat.
Yes. And my understanding is that those keys are generated when the device is manufactured. And so that the company does not have direct access to the key itself. By the way, that's another example of a big economic incentive of breaking the security of these devices if you get the manufacturer's key. So each device has its own key, and that's generated when it's manufactured. Then there's a manufacturer's key, which is highly protected. But if you could get the Intel master key out of the TPM, that would be worth a lot of money to you. And people, I assume, tried. I haven't heard of it happen. So.
AG?
This is Adrian Gropper. Sorry for the initials. Along some of the lines that have been talked about so far, including recently this attack on a secure element by NDIO or what it is that you're signing case, and what came up before about impersonation attacks, the comment that was made, I think, by Alan. My question is this, and this is something I tried to take up at IAW a couple of months ago without too much feedback coming in, is this idea of splitting the thing that has the secure element, calling that the wallet, the thing that has the keys and a secure element, away from the thing that does the user interface for the most part in a domain-specific way, say different for healthcare versus whatever, travel. In other words, and this is something that is going on to some extent in the sign-in with Ethereum example, where rather than allowing a lot of flexibility on the UI component of the wallet, they're basically just standardizing a little bit of information but anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is it seems to me that this would make impersonation much, much more difficult, as well as making everything more convenient in general, because you're only using one app or wallet to sign things, no matter what you're doing, even when people are designing user experiences that are domain specific. Sorry for the long question.
Yeah, I'm afraid that will have some advantages, but there's also opens up a new line of attack, which is now you can talk to the wallet without the user interaction, right? And
oh no, what do you mean?
The wallet just, I think in your model, the wallet provides an API, and different applications using different keys will use that API to talk to the wallet, right? Whereas if the wallet has its own API,
sure that they have to use different keys.
Right. Yeah. But
my example.
Well, again, I have to do a threat analysis, but just quickly, it seems like there's another place to insert malicious interactions, and so that would be the one thing I think of. From a
But how can you solve the credential sharing problem then, Al?
yeah, no, I mean from a practical point of view, I'd much rather create a wallet that had an API and let other people worry about the domain-specific applications. That would be a great thing, I think. But from a security perspective, I have to think about it more.
Thank you.
Any other topics you want to cover today, Mark? We have to wrap it up fairly soon.
Okay, I still want to come back to the distributed systems, because distributed system security has some similarities with single machine security, but it has a lot of different implications. And I think we really need to understand that, because the world is distributed. And I don't know, I don't recall now, I read that chapter a while back, but I don't recall too much about that space. So for example,
you are correct. We don't say enough about that space.
So for example, revocation often comes up, and with an ACL system, you have one place to go to. So people always say, well, I can revoke because I could just remove the entry from the ACL, and then the next time you try to request. One of the mistakes that the OAuth people made was that their bearer tokens could be what they called multi-audience tokens. That means you didn't know who might honor the token, so you couldn't tell that party to revoke. In a true OCAP system, the token denotes the object that you're using, and therefore you know who to tell to revoke. And so I think these are important considerations. Also, in distributed systems, you have no possibility of confinement. On a single computer, you could imagine having confinement. And that has serious implications for policies that you can and cannot enforce. So I would think that it's almost worth another chapter.
Any other topics you'd like to cover, Mark, before we wrap it up?
Do you have Allison's questions in front of you? Is there?
I can pull them up.
Adrian has his hand up again.
Oh,
Adrian?
AG?
No, I didn't for the.
Okay.
Yeah, Google Meets has a thing where when you start talking, it automatically lowers your hand. It gets it right about 90% of the time. Sometimes it lowers it because somebody's speaking loudly, but somebody else is speaking.
In our last 5 minutes, we can deal with one of Allison's questions, which are, what are the similarities and differences between physical and digital security?
Well, to me, the biggest difference is physical security has to be a presence, and digital security can be remote. Now, with IoT, that's changing, because somebody in Romania can attack my pacemaker, but if you're just talking about computers, that's the big difference. If they need physical access to my machine, it's a much harder attack than if they only need electronic access.
Yeah, Alan, I think your answers are very good for very good points, but it's not what the chapter meant when it introduced the physical versus digital.
Sorry,
that's okay. Like I said, what you said was still important. We were contrasting sort of the pre-computer understanding we have of just physical security in the physical world versus security in the digital realm. And what you're bringing up is that there's also a coupling, obviously, between the digital realm and the fact that these that this digital realm is embedded in the physical realm. So there's a coupling to physical issues, and obviously the supply chain attacks we just talked about touches on that, and many other things do too. But the main intuition that we were trying to get across in the chapter is that in the pre-computer physical realm of physical security, that you can't build impenetrable walls. All security is about boundaries. In the physical realm, you can build, thicker and thicker or more and more impenetrable boundaries, but they can only resist attack. They can't prevent attack. So because of the nature of physics, real isolation is impossible. Whereas in the digital realm, we've got perfect boundaries all around us. They're cheap and plentiful. Address space separation, object encapsulation in programming languages, cryptographic protocols are close enough to perfect for practical purposes, and that so that's the first thing to understand about sort of the difference in intuition between the two. The other one is that in the physical world, the defense is all about raising the marginal cost of attack, whereas in the digital realm, there is no marginal cost of attack per victim. So there's sort of both good news and bad news in shifting from physical to digital, which is the good news is the cheap, plentiful, perfect boundaries, and the bad news is no marginal cost.
Actually, I have a counterexample in that when LinkedIn got hacked, their password database got hacked. I did a quick calculation and figured out that my password had 72 bits of entropy, which means they were going to go after you before they went after me. In other words, my walls were thicker than yours. So I think there is some analogy there that still holds.
Yes. At small key sizes, you've got a cost that's not to the degree of being a practical impossible.
No, that's not the point. That's not the point I was making. I was making the point that the attackers will go after the easy targets before the hard ones. So by hardening yourself, you're outrunning your friends. You don't have to outrun the bear. That was the point.
Okay. But then the question that these plentiful, perfect boundaries raises, that we raise the question and we try to answer it, is if we've got such perfect boundary material to build on, why have we built such hopelessly insecurable software architectures? And the reason is that we need more than isolation. We need cooperation between mutually suspicious parties, which means that we need to make all of our boundaries semi-permeable. We need them to enable the interaction across them needed for the cooperative composition that we intend, so that we can bring together their functionality into greater overall problem-solving ability, but have at the same time that semi-permeability not let through too much potential to cause destructive interference.
And by the way, I think the crypto barriers are not perfect because of the key management problem. Look at all the breaks because of lost and stolen keys. So, these are not perfect barriers, I don't think, anyway. But your point about needing to open them up is definitely true.
Yeah, and for the crypto, I would just make the same separation that I would make, let's say, for address space barriers in at the hardware level, which is the systems built to use them, secure operating systems, and then logins with potentially subvertible login passwords. You're still sort of the endpoints of how do you get into them to make use of them, and how do you so there's this initial entry problem, but then once you're in, the boundaries are perfect. And I think that represents the cryptographic protocol reality as well, is there's all sorts of attacks around setting up, for example, a TLS connection. Once a TLS connection is set up with adequate key size, it's pretty close. It's pretty close to impenetrable for practical purposes.
Now, Mark, we have reached the end of our 2-hour session. You may have noticed Allison is in the chat, so she did successfully reach her destination despite an hour's delayed flight. So all is well with Allison. I'm happy to let everyone know she's okay. And any last words, Mark, or have we just basically reached a good ending point?
Let's see if Allison has any last words, since she just joined us. But as far as I'm concerned, I think I've said what I had in mind.
Very good. Allison, do you want to say hello or goodbye? If so, you can mute.
Sure. I'm still offboarding, but yeah, I'm very, very sorry that I was late. I'm sorry that it didn't work out with the second password. But as I could tell from joining for the last minutes, you had a wonderful conversation. And I'm really sure that Mark was the perfect host for this one. So I think it all turned out well. So yeah, very excited to have witnessed the final moment of this.
Very good. Thank you, Allison. And we'll wrap it up now. Thanks, everyone, for attending and for finding us despite our technical difficulties. All turned out for the best in the end. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Gernot, who is now gone. Thank you, Allison. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.